Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Flyer Sports here on Flyer TV. I'm Joe Sullivan.
I'm Sean Vitalis.
And I'm sure you guys are a little confused about our studio setup. We are not in the studio, unfortunately, because our switcher, we do have some technical difficulties. But Sean, we're making worth what it is.
Yeah, we're making do. We got a nice little setup here. Fifth floor, Roche Library. You might see us various places around campus over the next week or two. You never know. We gotta keep the viewers on their toes.
Yeah, and it's a nice little switch up in scenery, to say the least. It's kind of good to be here, obviously, with the handheld mics and just being on camera. It's good to be back for sure. And we've missed a lot of games. We've got a lot of games to cover here for Dayton.
Yeah. I mean, let's jump right in. Flyers into the regular season 3-2. We last picked up on a huge week from Dayton, taking on VCU and St. Louis. But we've got a lot to come over. And Loyola, that was the first one. Duran double-double, Tumani Kamara and Duran, they combined for 37, and it was a pretty easy victory. Flyers never trailed. Doubled the assists of Loyola 16-8 and out-rebounded the team 39-12, and that's, I think, what we really hoped to see in the first Loyola matchup, but that's not what we got the first time around.
Yeah, Dayton Flyers took care of business this time, winning 65-49 out in Chicago. First game was close. I mean, big three-pointer from Loyola sent it to overtime at UD Arena. And at that point, Loyola was the last seed, and they still are the worst team in the A10. But things went back around, and the Flyers took care of business the second time at Loyola, at Chicago, and kept that win streak going. Like you said, after that huge week against VCU and St. Louis, who were at that point the top two teams in the A10, they kept it rolling with that big win.
Yeah, I think one thing that we really addressed the last time was that Dayton was playing down to other teams. And just like Loyola, I mean, worst team in the conference, 4-12, 4-13, something around there right now in conference play, by far the lowest. And, it was a tight game, won in overtime. And a lot of people were still excited about the win. But as a Flyer fan, you're going to be like, ooh, that's a bad win. I mean, a win is a win, but that wasn't a pretty one. So we saw them really just take control right there. And moving on to the UMass game, that was game number 2. Another win and another easy win. Duran had 22. Brea and Kamara both had 11. So we got 44 between those three guys. And free throw shooting was at 76%. I mean, that was just a really efficient win for them.
Yeah, and we've seen all season. I mean, the Flyers have proved that they are a really good team defensively, and they get stops down the stretch. Offensively, it's kind of been a struggle. Been a little bit streaky this year against lower tier opponents. And we saw that earlier in the year with the loss, against Rhode Island. Kept it close with Loyola, and then St. Bonnie's got a big win against the Flyers at their place, but took care of business offensively over that 4-game span, and they really capped it off with that huge win against UMass, winning 72-54. And again, Duran, great game. He's been playing fantastic as of late, and just kind of a lot of work from all sides of things, right? It's got some great minutes from players off the bench. Kobe Brea played pretty well. And again, shooting good for the line. The Flyers are sent to the line a lot. I mean, with Duran Holmes being the tallest team in the country on average, with Kamara as well, and not the best three-point shooting team, they are sent to the line a lot. And against UMass, they delivered pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, shot the ball real well, 51% from the floor and 42% from outside, and kept it in the 70s, 77% as a team from the line. I mean, that was really good for them, and I think especially when we come to the A10 tournament, that's what we need to see. I mean, they don't need to have their highest scoring game ever, and we're typically not that high scoring of a team. If we win, it might be 65 to something in the 50s. We're not scoring 80, really on anybody. But we need to play efficient basketball, and that's what they were able to do in UMass and that Loyola game. Both of them extremely efficient. We had 19 assists, only 8 turnovers as a team, which is super, super low for us. We're averaging 12 or 13, definitely in the double digits there. And as well for Duran. I mean, we talked about his offensive scoring, 22 points, but he also had 7 boards, only 3 fouls. He dished out 3 assists and had 3 blocks and 2 steals. And in his rookie campaign last year, he was A10 Rookie of the Year. His blocking and defensive presence was what really elevated him to a potential, lottery pick going into the year. And we've kind of seen that fade away, becoming more of an offensive threat for the Flyers and not as much on the defensive side, but 3 blocks and 2 steals. I mean, speak about that.
Yeah, I mean, he's been playing really well just defensively, and he's leading the A10 in blocks. Now, yet again, picking up things, obviously, in the middle of the year, he had a great stretch offensively. I mean, putting up 20, 30-point games night in, night out, really in December when the Flyers needed it after that struggle to the start of non-conference play. But Flyers, at this point, after they beat UMass, 4-game winning streak. That's their longest winning streak since the month of December. And they tried to keep that going until they took on George Mason at home, which was a tough loss for them, 74-69, in a game where, like we said earlier, defensively, Flyers have showed that they're one of the best defensive teams in the country and probably the best one in the A10, but struggle to get stops down the stretch. It's George Mason hung on to win it 74-69.
Yeah, I mean, that was a tough one. Ronald Polite tore us up. I mean, for such a great defensive team, he dropped 22 on us and led his Patriots team to the W. Duran had 34. I mean, like we said, an incredible offensive game, but the rest of the game was pretty subpar. He was the only Flyer in double digits. Tumani Kamara and Kobe Brea both sat at 9 points, so just under that. But we talked about how efficient they were in the previous game. Not terrible efficiencies, but where we struggled was at the line. 16 of 27 as a team. Duran Holmes, 12 of 18 from the line. I mean, they really went with like the hack-a-shack type of strategy there, and it's working for them.
Yeah, Duran Holmes, 34 points, almost scored half of Dayton's points in that game. But down the stretch, I mean, they struggled, and we've talked about it all year. In those final few minutes of a tight game, and, with the energy from the Red Scare and UD fans, it felt like the game was in their hands, despite George Mason, sticking by and keeping the game close towards the wire. But again, they just could not get a stop down the stretch. And several turnovers. Malachi Smith, 2 turnovers in the last minute for them, really put the game away. And the Flyers, again, had a great chance to win that game. But George Mason and the Patriots stuck it out for a win.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, Malachi Smith, only 3 turnovers in the game. I mean, not a bad game, really for him. Obviously didn't produce as much offensively, only 6 points, but he dished out 5 assists and had a couple of boards to go along with it. I mean, not terrible, but it was just, that's when you don't want those, those simple mistakes. And there was one where he drove down low and Duran took the pick and roll, and it was Polite. Polite picked him off, and if he would have made that pass a little bit earlier, gotten the first look, or created something else, that's George Mason not getting some points. It completely changes the game. So I mean, in the box score, it's like, oh, he had 6, 5, 3, and 3, something like that. But, when you watch it on film, it's like at the most crucial points, he couldn't come through for the Flyers. And that was really big. Duran as well. He missed 2 free throws at the end that would have tied the game, even with George Mason scoring late. George Mason also had 18 points off of turnovers. So, I mean, that was really big for them. And it was a tight game the whole way. But that last minute and a half was just brutal for the Flyers.
Yeah, and we've talked about it a lot on this show is, what is Anthony Grant? What's their game plan in those final few minutes? And we've seen it several times, not only this season, but last season as well, that, the Flyers time and time again have been unprepared in those final few minutes. Again, defensively, they could get the stops, but who can hit that big shot down the wire? Again, those final few turnovers in those last few minutes were crucial for the Flyers with a big loss, ending their 4-game winning streak. But bounce back for them in a big win against a LaSalle team that they were expected to beat as they stayed home after that road game stretch. And they took care of business against LaSalle, winning 77-53.
Yeah, I mean, that one was another blowout, a lot like that UMass game. Once again, they never trailed. Duran had 16, 10, and 5. And, I mean, really, if he can do that, 16, 10, and 5, and play some pretty solid defense for the Flyers, didn't have any blocks or steals, but, he does stuff as well that doesn't show up in the box scores, him and Tumani Kamara. But, I mean, that's a perfect stat line for him, and this was a much better team game. Yeah. He had 16. Tumani Kamara had 14 with 5 boards and dished out an assist as well. He had a block and a steal. Clean game from him. Mustafa Amzil sat in with 10 points, so he also reached double digits. And Malachi Smith as well really dished the ball out well, 7 points, but 10 assists on 1 turnover. And that's what they needed. That's really, really what they needed in that George Mason game. And the next game we'll talk about, which is that last SLU game, the final game of the season, is they need a Malachi Smith to share the ball and do it in a clean fashion. And they were able to get it there. Like I said, never trailed. Incredible efficiency. Shot the ball almost as good from outside as they did just overall. From 3-point, they went 12 of 23. That's 52%. And they went 29 of 53, 55% from the floor.
Yeah, and something that the Flyers really going into the season, with the preseason ranking and all the hype around this team, people all across the country were talking about how much depth and how much production they can get off the bench. And I feel like this LaSalle game really showed it. As again, Mike Sharaf-Joms hit 3 threes, getting him involved, as well as Mustafa Amzil with double-digit points off the bench. It really showed that energy and that spark that fans were hoping that the Flyers could do game in, game out. And it sometimes have been a struggle. But again, the LaSalle game took care of business and was kind of a sneak peek of getting back on track and what they could do in the end of, March.
Yeah. And like you said, the depth was huge there. Double digits off the bench, and Mike Sharaf-Joms had 9 off the bench. A clean game for him as well. But yeah, at one point in the season, it was like a 5 or 6 man rotation with all the injuries to the guards. The shortest player that was playing for us was RJ Blakeney, who's 6'6". Part of that's attributed to our height, but as well, we had almost no guards playing, and Mike Sharaf-Joms is 6'8". Yeah. So as a guard, he's taller than our small forward in RJ Blakeney. We had some pretty wild rotations going there, and preseason we were in the top 25, had all this Elite 8 talk, Sweet 16 talk going on, and it was like, yeah, these guys are one of the biggest teams, one of the deepest teams as well, with an 8 or 9 man rotation, and this was one of the first games that we really showed that off. We've had some injuries. RJ Blakeney was away from the team for personal reasons. Now he's back. I think this was a great game, especially kind of as like a first round in the A10 tournament. I think this is a game that could really jumpstart them into the next couple rounds.
Yeah, and we've talked about it all season with Sharaf-Joms really being thrown in a position that nobody really expected as a true freshman. You talk about that team last year, one of the youngest teams, I believe they're the 3rd youngest team in the country, having everybody back, a lot of experience coming from Coach Grant's team to start this year. And Sharaf-Joms, a top 100 recruit according to ESPN, had a lot of hype around him, being the first Mongolian Division I athlete ever to come to the United States. And in the beginning of the season, had a great start offensively, was actually in the starting lineup in the first game of the season. And with everybody coming back healthy, Malachi Smith and Kobe Elvis now at the 1 and 2 at full health, he's been looked at to hopefully produce some good minutes off the bench. And I feel like in that LaSalle game, he did really well.
Yeah, I think he's really coming into his own here, late in the season. Definitely tough being thrown into the situation that he was thrown into. I'm not sure if he was expecting that. I'm not sure if the coaching staff was really expecting that. Obviously, with some injuries, illnesses, personal matters that have surrounded the Flyers this season, it's been a mixed bag for him for sure. We've seen some really great moments and some not so great moments. But like you said, he's gotten a ton of attention. First Mongolian player to play Division I basketball, any Division I sport for that matter, and has played really well, I think, in his role. And I think the second half of the season, coming off the bench, playing in his traditional role, I think that's really helped him settle in. I think next year, I expect him to stay, and I think that he'll be one of the starting guards regularly now. And I think he'll be able to make that jump from just a contributor to a leader on the team and someone that can really set us up to play some really great offense.
Yeah, and after that LaSalle win, the Flyers were basically a lock at the number 2 seed. VCU took care of business, the rest of the way after losing to the Flyers. They beat St. Louis at that point at home, which locked them the number 1 seed in the A10 tournament. But the Flyers, again, a tough test for their final game of the year at St. Louis. In a game that last year the Flyers lost, which was a scrappy game, a really tough one. It's always a tough one out there against the Billikens. But the Flyers were in it the whole way, man, and they closed out the first half really well and put them in a good position to win this game.
Yeah, going into halftime, they were down 9, but they hit a stretch. Going into half, they went on a little run there, and actually outscored St. Louis 29-24 in the second half. Lost 65-61. It was a quality game, and one that was, definitely frustrating. You definitely don't want to see them lose, but St. Louis was really just the better team in this game. We had one more assist, 16 to their 15, but we did lose the rebound battle. Dayton pulled in 37, while St. Louis pulled in 41. So they got a few more shot attempts. They took 59. And I think part of that is the rebounding, and we've seen so much great rebounding from Tumani Kamara and Deron Holmes, but in this game, lost that battle, and that was big.
Yeah, and Kamara only played 14 minutes in this game, got in foul trouble real early, which for the big men for the Flyers, which has kind of been their go-to spot all across the board. It was a struggle, and they had to, mix in some guys, and Anthony Grant really conserved his minutes on the first half. Kamara really didn't play much in that first half. End of the game, he kind of, got him in after, Kamara got 4 fouls. But at the end of the game, Kamara hit a big layup for the Flyers, keeping them in the game. But, some missed free throws put them in a bad spot. And St. Louis, again, took care of business. Flyers playing well defensively and getting those stops down the stretch. But again, we talked about it, and we talked about it earlier. And, those final few minutes, what can Dayton do? Who can be their go-to guy to go get them a bucket and put them back in the game?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really had any buzzer beaters or under a minute, just an incredible place to kind of come back. And like you said, they went into on a great streak going into half. You'd think that they'd know how to close out a game. I mean, they are a pretty streaky team. So you'd expect them to be able to go on one when they need to. But time and time again, we've been in games that are down to the wire, close games under a minute. Games where we've held the lead, games where we're trying to come back, pretty much every situation. And, 4 or 5 games now, we've lost in that last minute or two.
Yeah, and those last 4 to 5 minutes of the game, offensively for both teams, was a struggle. Yeah. I mean, nobody could buy a bucket. And we saw earlier in the season, Malachi Smith did a fantastic job against Yuri Collins, who is the leading assist leader in the country for the St. Louis Billikens, averaging, I believe, around 12 assists a game, which is unbelievable. And, Malachi Smith got the best of him early this year. But Yuri Collins had a great game, 12 points, 10 assists, compared to Malachi Smith's 5 points and 6 assists. And down the stretch, I mean, it looked like the Flyers couldn't find somebody who they could go, get them a bucket when they needed it. They kind of just, ran their offense, their give and go, ball screens, and just couldn't find anybody to get a good isolation and make a big play at the end of the game.
Yeah, I saw a tweet that Dayton is in the 300s. There's 364, I believe, Division I basketball programs, and Dayton was in the 300s somewhere. I want to say around 316 in possessions. We are an extremely slow playing team, and for one that has an incredible defense, you would expect a lot of defensive turnovers. We're getting out running and gunning, especially with such athletic guys like RJ Blakeney, Toumani Kamara, even Duran, and Malachi Smith, who has a pretty fast play style. But it's pretty much, unless it's a dunk down low in transition or a layup in transition, we're getting a shot off like under 5 seconds. It's a very stagnant offense.
Yeah, and you saw in that game against St. Louis, I mean, it really hurt them. There were several shot clock violations where Dayton really just struggled to get their offense going and just get on, a streak and a good run. And it hurt them in the end. Again, started the second half off fantastic. I believe, got out to a 7-0 run and made it, a 3-point game going into, the first few minutes of the second half. But St. Louis played fantastic, getting those buckets when they needed to. Obviously, Yuri Collins was great. They got it down low to their big man, and just Javonte Perkins, as well as Gibson Jimerson, who has been fantastic. Not this year in his sophomore campaign, but also last year as a freshman for St. Louis. Flyers took care of business against St. Louis in that first game with a big win, but St. Louis bounced back again. And for the second season in a row, St. Louis and the Dayton Flyers split at 1-1.
Yeah, before we hop into the preview of the Atlantic 10 tournament, I've got the final stats on that little stat that I had for you. 363 Division I teams, not 364. And Dayton, I overestimated them. We're not 316. We are 337 out of 363 Division I teams in possessions per game. So that means that, we're just not getting the ball that much. And when we do get the ball, we're taking a really long time. If we're putting shots up in 12 seconds, 15 seconds, you're going to get a lot more possessions, but it's a 30-second clock. And that means we're getting like 24, 25, 26 most of the time. And a lot of those shots aren't good. It's, some fadeaways in tough defensive positions. And, maybe that attributes to some of our big men rebounding. But still, you'd like to see them, rank a lot higher in that.
Something the Flyers are definitely going to have to work on and, perfect going into the A10 tournament, which starts this Tuesday as the Dayton Flyers picked up the number 2 seed in the A10 tournament. After that loss against St. Louis, it really didn't matter. This was kind of a game to see what momentum they could get going into the A10 tournament and what they could look like before the tournament started. And, VCU sticking out the 1 seed in the tournament, Dayton at the 2, Fordham picking up the 3 seed with their first 20-win season in several decades. And then, again, St. Louis sitting at the 4 spot. But for the Dayton Flyers, they're going to play this Thursday as they'll get a double bye in the A10 tournament, and they will take on either the winner of the St. Joseph's Loyola game, which the winner of that game will play the number 7 seeds George Washington, and then whoever wins on that game, which will be either George Washington St. Joe's or the Loyola Chicago Ramblers, will take on the Dayton Flyers. And the Flyers struggled with Loyola early in the season, but they had a loss against George Washington, the number 7 seed. We talked about it over the past few months, and it's kind of been the mindset of this season is take each game at a time. We can't look forward to those big games against opponents like VCU or St. Louis or the best teams in the A10 because the Dayton Flyers, a bad loss against George Washington on the road, just one bad game, and they could be out of this tournament quickly.
Yeah, you saw that last year. Dayton really turned it on down the stretch, had that injury. Was that the quarterfinal or semifinal?
The semifinal, yeah.
There you go.
Malachi Smith going down early in the first half. Flyers were up 15 against Richmond in that semifinal game, and all they needed was that win. If they could win that game, they are one of the top 64 teams, and they make the tournament. But, struggled down the stretch, and Richmond came back and won that game and then beat Davidson to win the A10 tournament.
Yeah, Davidson got that at large bid, and UD, team number 65, just missed. And that's what they're going to have to avoid. And this time, there's no at-large bid for them. They've got to go all the way. And, the way that I view it is if Dayton beats one of those teams, whoever they'll end up playing, they would most likely take on Fordham in the next game, and then most likely either VCU or St. Louis. If they won out and just dominated the rest of the tournament, I would not be surprised. I wouldn't blink an eye. I'd be like, great week of basketball, guys. This is what we've been looking for all year.
Finally get to March.
Yeah. And if George Washington or even St. Joe's or, even Loyola, if they were to take us down in the first round, I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be like, that's kind of been our running thing all season. So I think the fun thing for A10 fans is this is a really wide open tournament. You do have some more dominant teams in the top 4, VCU, St. Louis, Dayton, and Fordham. But like you said, we lost to George Washington. VCU has lost to some of the other top teams. Fordham has lost. Their conference record is not that great. They really dominated in the out-of-conference section of this season. I think that makes it fun. It's frustrating as a Flyer fan because I don't feel too confident, going into this. I really wanted to be the 1 seed, and there was so much talk about us going undefeated in conference play, which obviously that didn't happen. I think the possibilities are endless, and that makes it really fun going into a tournament.
And it will be a one bid league this year, as really whoever wins the A10 will be the representative for the A10 come March. But second year in a row for the Dayton Flyers being favored in this tournament. Again, they are the 2 seed, and they have a 33% chance, according to Ken Palm, that they will be the winner of the A10. And you saw that last year as Dayton, again, came in as the 2 seed and had all that momentum after, what was really a great end. Other than that loss to St. Louis in the last regular season game of the year, again, it was a great end to the regular season for them as they really got things going offensively. And finally, that young group really meshed together and played great to give them the 2 seed. But like you said, it's game by game, and the A10 has shown, really every team in the A10 has shown that they can be inconsistent at times. And this, anybody could win this tournament because whoever does will make March.
Yeah, Joe, what do you think are the consequences of the Flyers taking an early exit? It happened last year. If that happens again, there's no at-large bid. What do you think's gonna? What are the? What are those consequences?
I think overall, the Dayton Flyers are going to lose some players next year. And I believe Duran Holmes and Tumani Kamara. Again, Tumani Kamara does have one more year of eligibility. He's going to graduate in the spring, but due to COVID, he'll have one more year. I think both of those guys will leave. And I think overall, I mean, last year the memo and really the talk of the town was we got everybody coming back, right? It's a young group. We're getting all these guys coming back. This year it's totally different. I mean, they're going to lose a few guys, and I'm sure one or two other guys will leave because of the transfer portal, just because of how prevalent it is. We're going to lose some players. And really, the talk of the town, obviously, being a preseason top 25 team was huge for Dayton. But that doesn't mean anything anymore because whoever wins the A10 tournament in Brooklyn is going to go to March. And one loss for the Dayton Flyers, it's all gone. Everything, over the past year and a half are all thrown out the window. As far as coaching-wise, I think Anthony Grant, despite what some fans might have to say about him, he's in a good spot. And I think, with his relationship with the athletic department and the university, he's been overall positive for the Dayton Flyers. So I don't think he'll be going anywhere. But an early round exit, I mean, something's got to change for the Dayton Flyers. Other than that 2020 season, the Anthony Grant era hasn't been what has been expected for Dayton.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And, especially 2014, you think that Elite Eight team, Archie Miller, the program was on the rise. I mean, and Dayton has been a basketball school through and through for, decades. But that was, a dominant era in the 2010s. And with Anthony Grant coming in, you expected that to continue. And there were some bright spots. But really that 2020 year is I think that would that year have finished out and would have the Flyers have made a Final Four championship run, Anthony Grant is kind of eternally could be the Dayton coach. But with that, season being cut short, he doesn't really have any huge claims to his coaching title here at UD. I mean, he's produced multiple high-quality teams. I mean, this team, last year's team, that 2020 season. All of them good teams, quality teams, and March Madness level, teams. But, what has come out of that? We had a semifinal loss last year. We're the 2 seed this year after being projected an Elite Eight team and being ranked in the top 25. That 2020 season, obviously, he's not to blame at all for that. That was completely out of his hands. But, kind of in the same vein, like nothing resulted in that. I mean, he can't say, I took this franchise and this team to a Final Four, whatever. So I think that he's definitely got one more year for sure. But I know that the frustration from the Flyer fans is continuously growing year after year of above average mediocrity. I mean, they're very high quality teams and always at the top of the A10. But when it gets to March, you don't see Dayton very often.
And I think in general, since take away that 2020 team and the talent and what could have been in that Cinderella story for the Dayton Flyers, this year, I think it's probably the most confidence that anybody's really had in the Anthony Grant era for a Dayton team to win the A10. As far as talent, they have it. They have all the pieces, right? It's just, in these possible three games that they'll have, the quarterfinal, semifinal, in the championship, can they put it all together? Because it only takes 3 games, but it also only takes one bad game for Dayton to be booted. And a bad loss will take them out of Brooklyn and the tournament. And, again, their chances and their hopes for March will be no more. So I think despite, what has some might say and a lot of people would say is a disappointing season for the Dayton Flyers, it's crunch time. Nothing else matters that was preseason, during the season, the fuss, the injuries. It doesn't matter anymore because I think in general, this is the most confident that anybody has really been for a Dayton team in the Anthony Grant era.
Yeah, the team's fully healthy. I think that's a huge thing for us. We've dealt with so many injuries and illnesses and stuff like that, and we've got everybody completely ready to go. No restrictions and stuff like that, which, typically you see teams, kind of start up here and then slowly fall down as guys get injuries and, run out of gas and going through the changes of seasons, you get illnesses. And an illness is a brutal thing to miss. Especially in, February and March when it comes to conference or March tourney time. If guys, have some diseases and stuff like that and they're out, it's like, they're not injured but not well enough to play. That can be brutal for a team. So it's incredible for the Flyers to kind of do the opposite, start off the season really injured and dinged up, and then kind of throughout the season get a little bit more healthy and a little bit more healthy, and now they're finally good to go. But still, what do you think they have to do to avoid the troubles that they've had in this past week or two? A couple, late game losses, and still playing down a little bit to some lower teams.
Well, I think on paper, I mean, if you just look at, the teams that are on Dayton's side of the bracket, you should feel confident, right? You got Fordham at the 3 seed. Obviously, you got Duquesne at the 6 and George Washington at the 7th. Despite anything that you know about the Dayton Flyers season, you expect them to, take care of business on their side of the bracket and then kind of look on the other side and say, okay, maybe we have St. Louis, or maybe we'll get VCU, two really good teams who, again, I think Dayton, VCU, and St. Louis are the top 3 most talented teams in the tournament. But again, I mean, you look through these teams. They lost to George Washington, who's the 7th seed, who they might play in their first game on Thursday. On the other side, they lost to Rhode Island, which was one of, if not their worst loss of the season, in a tough game. And then you got Fordham and Duquesne, 2 sneaky teams that, again, anybody can win it. You saw Richmond win it last year, taking care of business, beating Dayton, beating Davidson in the final. It only takes a few games in a spark from one team to make it. And I think, Dayton just has to go to their roots, and they have to put everything that they've, heard in the season and the off season away, because it means nothing at this point in the season, because it all comes down to Brooklyn and, this Thursday in their first game.
Yeah. Flyers, once again, playing Thursday, taking on George Washington or the winners of Loyola Chicago and St. Joe's. I mean, if you take Dayton out of the equation, who would be your other favorite to win it all?
Well, I think VCU is the favorite, in my opinion, for this tournament. Statistically, according to Ken Pon, they have Dayton winning at a 33% to win the championship. I believe VCU is right under that, who is sitting close to that list. But I think VCU has shown that they are the best team going into the A10 with what they're given, right? They've taken care of business for most of the season. Obviously, had that tough loss against Dayton at their place, but, they beat Dayton out at UD Arena, and that was what many people thought would be the only loss at home for the Dayton Flyers, which actually turned out to be the second one after that loss against George Mason. But I think VCU probably is the favorite for me. Sean, what do you think? Who do you think could come out of the other side?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to go with you. I mean, I think that UD should win our side. But, I mean, the other side's got some sneaky teams. St. Bonnie's beat VCU. They beat UD, earlier in the season, and they could definitely take down VCU. I mean, if you want to play the kind of revolving wheel, St. Bonnie's beat us, we beat VCU. I mean, technically, you would think that they'd be able to beat them. But, I mean, Davidson, a quality team. Foster Lawyer had some big plays a couple weeks ago. I want to say he dropped somewhere in the 20s in conference play. I mean, they've got some guys that, their averages might not be that high, but their ceiling is really up there. So, I mean, I would have to take I'll take the underdog. I'll take St. Louis. I mean, I think that St. Louis is a sneaky team. They're the 4 seed, but have wins, over Dayton, and some other quality teams. I mean, they played really good basketball. Yuri Collins has been the best point guard in the A10 this year. Malachi Smith won that first matchup for sure, but I think that Yuri got the best of us the second time around. But I definitely expect it to be a VCU St. Louis matchup. I mean, I think St. Bonnie's could pull up an upset there, but I really don't see George Mason taking down St. Louis, and I definitely don't see UMass or Richmond going super, super deep. But yeah, I mean, I think St. Louis UD would be a really fun third matchup in the postseason. Obviously, we split. Flyers taking the first one, St. Louis winning the last game of the season, like you mentioned earlier. So for that to be the conference championship, I think that'd be pretty fun, and the winner of that advancing into March, likely as a 12 or 13 seed, somewhere around there.
And I think Dayton's side of the bracket is really the star power comes from the big men. But you look at the other side, it's really guard play, right? You got Ace Baldwin Jr. for VCU. He's been fantastic and has been one of the best guards in the A10. Yuri Collins leading the NCAA in assists. And like you said, Davidson with Lawyer and the Bonnies, which with who has a very young team and a lot of new guys. I believe St. Bonaventure only returned one player from their team last year, who, again, last year they had a bunch of hype and didn't have the season that everybody thought they would have. I think, again, Dayton, a lot of their production has been coming from Tumani Kamara and obviously Deron Holmes. But the guard play has to be there for Kobe Elvis. I think he's got to get back on track offensively and give them some good minutes. I think Kobe Brea has shown a lot of great sparks over these past few games. And, RJ Blakeney has really played that 3 for most of the season. But, going down, having a few injuries, and, being sick, Kobe Brea has filled his spot pretty well. And I think he's shown a lot of heart and a lot of spark that he could add so a lot of great offense, not only, shooting-wise from the mid-range, but also from beyond the arc.
Yeah, looking at the Joe Lunardi bracketology from ESPN, VCU's marked as a 12 seed right now, taking on Miami in the Midwest. That'll come out of Kansas City. I love being a 12 seed. I mean, I really love the A10 as a 12 seed. The 12-5 is the most common upset in the March Madness tournament. And I think that an A10 team is someone that could absolutely go in and upset Miami. Indiana's been another team that's been that 4 or 5. At one point was a 3, but then they've had some tough losses recently. And being from Indiana, I would love to see a Flyer-Indiana matchup. But I think that Dayton could really be a team that has struggled in the A10 with some guard play issues and stuff like that. But when you get into some Power 5 play, our powers in our big men and our height, I mean, we can really use that against some Power 5 teams. And I think that hopefully the Flyers, but whoever advances out of the A10, I'd really love to see them, make a little run, hopefully into the Sweet 16. I think that'd be great.
And I think if Dayton gets out of the A10 tournament, which, again, they're the favorite, and a lot of Flyer fans are saying, tournament or bust, and just because of where the program is at and what is expected from the Dayton Flyers program. If they get to the tournament, obviously, they'll probably be around that 12 seed, like you said. I think with any Power 5 or Power, really good team coming out of, whether it's the Big Ten, SEC has some great teams that are kind of around that 4 or 5 range. I think they'll stack up well. Just size-wise and height-wise, and I think that could be huge going into March. But like we said earlier, guard play is essential, and Malachi Smith, again, has some great games for the Dayton Flyers this year and has shown some great production, obviously on the defensive side of things, but also offensively, hitting, just becoming a better shot creator and a better shot maker from beyond the arc. But once they get Kobe Elvis back on track, and if they could get, those 1, 2, 3 guys, and also some production off the bench from Mike Sharvjomps and RJ Blakeney, I think they could, maybe make a quick run and get a, what could be a win out of that first round in March.
Yeah, like we said earlier, Dayton will be playing. That's their quarterfinal game. They got the double bye. They're the 2 seed. They'll be playing this Thursday. That's on USA Network. Playing the winner of George Washington and either Loyola Chicago or St. Joe's. If they advance, they'll most likely take on Fordham or possibly Duquesne. And yeah, that's really all we have left for the season.
Yeah, and that'll be a Thursday game at 5 p.m. Out in Brooklyn, and that'll be on USA Network. You can tune into there, and also you can have updates from us here on Flyer TV. You can follow our Instagram at Flyer Sports, and we will give you updates on the games and a bunch of different content. And I believe it's Flyer Sports TV. Sorry, I forgot to add the TV. But yeah, you could just keep up with the content, and we'll try and get this episode out as well. We appreciate all of our people being patient with us as, again, we've had struggles with the studio. But it's great to be back and a lot to look forward for this Dayton Flyers team as it is crunch time here in Dayton, Ohio. For everybody here for Flyer Sports and Flyer TV, I'm Joe Sullivan alongside my partner Sean Vitalis, and we'll see you on the next episode here on Flyer TV.